I want to record to my computer.
This is a story from a book that Joseph and I did many years ago, and it's still one of my favorites, and it's still a book that you can find. It's put out by Fulcrum Press, and it's available in the museum gift store. It's called The Girl Who Married the Moon, and this is the title story from that book, The Girl Who Married the Moon, an Alutiiq story. Long ago, in the village of Chiniak on the island of Kodiak, there lived two cousins. Now, these girls, born very close to one another, were closer than sisters. They, of course, had many talents, digging spruce roots and weaving baskets and hats, searching for berries for people to eat, hunting in their little two-person kayak. Wherever you saw one of those girls, you saw the other. Now, as they grew older and were given the chin tattoos that said they could marry, people looked at them and thought, they are such strong, smart, beautiful young women. Any man would be lucky to marry one of them, and in fact, they might take two husbands. You could do that then, you see. But the girls had eyes for none of the young men in their village, none of the young men on their island. You see, they had fallen in love. Every evening, they would go down to the gravel beach, turn their kayak over and lean back against it and wait for the moon to rise. And when the moon rose and was walking through the sky, the girls would say, "Oh, if only he would come to earth. I would like to marry him." Now, one night, not long after the moon appeared in the sky, clouds came up and covered the sky. "Oh," said the girls, "why does he hide his face?" And then, out of the darkness, they heard footsteps on the gravel beach. And coming toward them was a tall young man with a great glowing mask on his face. And the girls knew this was the moon. "I have heard you," said the moon. "I have heard you two talking, and it happens that I need a wife. So I will marry one of you." But the cousins linked arms and said, "If you would marry one of us, you must marry both." The moon said, "It is a long journey to my home behind the sky, and life with me will not be easy. I will take the one of you that is the most patient." "Well, we're both very patient," said the young women. And finally, the young man gave in. He cupped his hands behind their heads and said, "Close your eyes. This path I follow is not for you to know. Close your eyes and keep them closed until we reach my home." And then he lifted them into the air and resumed his path across the sky. And he was right. It was a very long journey. And finally, one of the girls grew impatient. "I will open just one eye, just a little bit, to see where we are." But when she did that, the hair slipped from her head and she began to fall down, 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 and back to that gravel beach. And she was a long time waiting for her hair to grow back, mourning her cousin, for that young woman kept her eyes closed. And finally, they came to the land behind the sky, and the moon showed the young woman the place where he lived. He showed her through his home, all the different rooms. But there was one room off the bedroom that was covered with a great blanket. "That is where I store the things for my work," said the moon. "You must never even lift that blanket." And the young woman agreed. And so they were married. And at first, the young woman was very happy. The moon was a kind and gentle and loving husband. But as time passed, she grew lonelier and lonelier. She never knew when her husband would be leaving her or how long he would be away. And back at home, there was always work to be done and many hands to make that work light. Here, there was no one but her husband. And finally, one night, she began to complain. "Why must you leave me? Why must you be gone for so long?" "It is my work," said the moon. "Why can I not travel with you and share in your work?" "Oh, it is too hard. You would not be able to do my work. You stay here and be happy." But she wasn't. Finally, one night, she decided to go and explore this land behind the sky. She knew so very little about this country where her husband lived. So she set out walking from her home, and she came to a place where many trails branched off and went in many different directions. So she picked a trail and she followed it. And she came to a place where there was a young man lying stretched out on the ground with his head in a hole in the earth. She rushed up to him saying, "Oh, talk to me, I've been so lonely." But the young man would not answer. And so she went back the way she had come. She followed a different trail and a different trail and another trail, and it was always the same. At the end of the trail would be a young man or a young woman with their face peering down into a hole in the ground. And finally, when no one would talk to her, the young woman reached out and kicked one of the people with her foot. "Talk to me," she said. And the young man lifted his head from the hole in the earth and looked at her, and she saw that he had one great glowing eye in the center of his forehead. "Do not bother me," he said. "I am working." And the woman turned and went back the way she had come, very fast. And then when she was back at home, she wandered until she came to that room with the blanket blocking the door. "This is my home too. I should have the right to see what is in there." And so she went and lifted the blanket away from the door. and on the walls were great glowing masks that made a shining curve of light all the way from the newest sliver of the new moon, growing larger and larger and larger until it was the great glowing mask of the full moon, and then growing smaller and smaller. She saw the place where the mask her husband had been wearing when he left, where it belonged on the wall. She couldn't resist. I wonder how he feels wearing the light on his face. And she reached up and took the full moon mask down and set it on her face. She looked around through the mask, and when she was satisfied, she went to pull the mask from her face, but it was stuck there. And no matter how hard she tried, she could not pull that mask loose from her face. And then she heard steps coming up the gravel beach. Her husband. She ran out of the room, ran to her bed, and threw the fur coverings over her head, just as her husband came into the room. He looked at her and said, "Wife, are you ill?" She said, "I have a pain in my face." So he walked to the room where the masks were. He lifted the blanket. He took the mask from his face, placed it on the wall, and turned and walked back to her. He threw the fur coverings off the bed, and there she sat with the mask of the full moon on her face. And when he saw that, he laughed. Very gently, he reached down and pulled that mask from her face. "Maybe you better tell me what else you've been doing today." So she told him about walking and following the paths, and the young people who would not speak to her, and the young man who had the great glowing eye in the center of his forehead. And she told him she had kicked him. He said, "Those are the stars. Do not bother them when they are working." He went and he hung the full moon mask back on the wall. And then he came back to her saying, "I can see that I was wrong. I can see that you have been lonely and that you want work of your own to do. You have shown me that you can carry the masks every bit as well as I can. So we will share my work." And so it was. From that day on, when the moon was in its newest sliver, waxing and waxing and waxing to the glory of the full moon, the young man carried those masks. And when the moon began to grow smaller and smaller and smaller, that was the young woman in the moon. So you see, look at the evening sky. Is the moon waxing? That's the man in the moon. Is the moon waning? That's the woman in the moon. Because ever since that time, they have shared the job of carrying the light through the evening sky. Joseph?
That was a wonderful story, Gayle. This is the reason why I don't tell that story anymore. You do. It's very much your story. In our traditions among the Abenaki people, we always begin by introducing ourselves, and so I'll do that in the Abenaki language. Kwai kwai ni ba, hello my friends. De Louise Soza, palanoki da hozid. My name is Joseph, for the peaceful one. And Dai Salatogi, Alano Bizombik. I'm of the area we call Saratoga, or the medicine spring place. Alnoba nia, a human being is what I am. Takiak, and so are you. And also, Nolhegan Abenaki nia. I belong to the Nolhegan Abenaki Nation. We have many stories of the sky. In fact, we call the stars the Awatawesuk, little distant above ones. We call the moon Nanibon Sad, the night traveler. For you see, every native tradition has their own way of seeing the world around them. And although ours is not the same as our friends, the Aningluia, the Cherokee, still we have great respect, as they do, for all the things that exist and live in the universe, especially the beings above this earth. In fact, we say there are three realms. There's the below realm, Anopkik, there is Kik, the earth, and there is Spemkik, the skyland, the land above the earth. And many of our stories talk about travel from earth to sky. And there are stories in every one of our 500 different native languages that deal with that travel that might be made by a human being up into the skyland. One of the most spectacular things to see in the sky are the northern lights. I'll never forget the time when I saw them at their brightest. It was when I was making a trip to the Chippewa Cree Reservation in northern Montana. I was driving very late at night because my plane had arrived much later than planned, and so it was after midnight. As I drove along, it was a beautiful evening. I could see lights reflecting from the fields, and I realized those lights were the eyes of deer standing close to the edge of the driveway, of the, I should say, the roadway. And then I saw a sign which said that I was very close to the Chief Joseph battlefield, the place where the great patriot Chief Joseph fought his last battle with his Nez Perce people. It was near a little town called Chinook, which means that warm wind that comes and melts away the snow. I had to stop, and I had to read that marker there by the side of the road. And as I did, I suddenly realized something was happening. I looked up into the sky, and the northern lights began streaming down, so brilliant and so bright. I don't know how long I stood there, but I was entranced by it. It was the most beautiful thing I think I'd ever seen in the night sky. Now I should mention Wilfred Buck. Wilfred Buck is a Cree storyteller, and he tells his own story of the northern lights. In fact, he tells how when he was a child, he was always told by his father, never go out at night when the northern lights are in the sky, and especially do not whistle at them, because if you whistle at them, they will come and take you up into the skyland. And Wilfred said he used to whistle at those lights all the time, but they never came and took him. So he was really pretty disappointed. So I'm going to tell you now one of our Abenaki stories, a story of the northern lights. And the story goes like this. Long ago, there was a chief whose name was Morning Star, and Morning Star had just one son. He loved his son very much, and so he wanted to have his son do whatever he wanted to do. His son wanted to go out at night, he would let him go out at night. If he wanted to go play by himself, he could do that. In fact, his son did not like to play with other children for some reason. In fact, every day, as the sun began to go down in the sky, his son would turn and face the direction of the winterland, the north, and begin to walk. He would walk till he was out of sight. His father would not follow him, thinking, my boy needs to know I trust him. And every day, every night, I should say, that son would come back to his father, and Morning Star was pleased. But one night, his son began to walk. He disappeared from sight. His father had a strange feeling that something was wrong. As he looked up, he saw the northern lights beginning to appear in the sky, and his son was walking in that direction. But again, because he loved his son so much and respected what he wanted to do, he did not call him back or follow him. Instead, he waited in their wigwam, waited all through the night. When the next day came, his son had not returned, and now Morning Star knew that something was wrong. Now, he was a great tracker. He could follow the tracks of any creature, and so it was not hard for him to see the footprints of his son. He began to follow that trail. He walked and walked for a long, long time. He walked as the sun rose higher in the sky. He walked as the sun went further down and disappeared. He continued to walk by the light of the moon. And as he walked, he saw before him a hill rising. He began to climb that hill higher and higher. That hill turned into a mountain. He still continued to climb, for he was determined to find his son, whose trail led up that mountain range. And then he took one more step and found himself in a strange land. And he was not alone. There were people all around, and those people were wearing rainbows as belts. And each of them had a light on their head that shone brightly. One of those men came up to him and said, "You are in the land of the northern lights." "Ah," Morning Star said, "I've come to look for my son." The one who spoke to him smiled and said, "Ah, he is here indeed. He has come here to play ball. He plays ball every night with our children, and he has decided, or rather we have decided, to keep him here with us, unless you want him back." "I do," said Morning Star, "for he is my son, my only son." "Aha," that man said, "in that case, you may have him if you can tell which of those he is." And he looked out on a great ball field as wide as the sky. And on that ball field, there were many young men and young women playing a game of ball. And as they played, it was easy to see them, for each of them shone like light. And the ball they played with seemed to be made of fire as they ran back and forth across the sky. "Choose," the man in the sky, man of the northern lights said. "Tell me which one you think is your son." Chief Morning Star smiled. "I would know my son anywhere. He is the one with the brightest light." "Ah," said the chief of the northern lights, "you are right. He is your son. He can come home with you." Chief Morning Star called to his son. His son came running over. He said, "My son, it is time for us to go home now." And his son said, "That is good, Father. I've been playing ball a long time. I'm hungry and tired. But how will we get back home?" That was when the chief of the northern light spoke and said, "Because you have found your son, because you were so determined to come here, we will make it easier for you to return." And then he whistled once, and as he whistled, two great birds came flying down. "They will carry you back home." Morning Star climbed on the back of one bird. His son climbed the back of the other. And then they flew down, back down to the land of men, leaving above them the Wababanal, the northern lights, playing their game across the sky.
That was beautiful. That was just beautiful. Ah, I've never heard that story before, Joseph. It's really nice.
I don't think many people know it, actually. It's not what I've
It's, yeah, it's beautiful. It really is. I'm so grateful that you told it. Well, shall we go on to our mutual story?
Yes, actually, I have a copy here of the book that we were published in. I bet you have one too.
I do. It's right over there.
Yeah, the story of the Milky Way. Unfortunately, it's out of print, but the story is still tellable, and we can.
Well, and you know, you can often find used copies on Amazon.
That's true.
Anything that's out of print, if you just search by the author's name, you can usually find a copy. But it's a Cherokee story that many people know and tell, and it was wonderful to work with Joseph to make it into a book for young people. As you'll see, there is a great spirit dog in the story, and it is his actions that cause the creation of the Milky Way. And there are many ways of telling it, but Joseph and I thought it was important that we create the character who solves the riddle. Often that is left unsaid in the tale, and it seemed important to us. And so we attributed the solution to a figure that not many people understand in Cherokee history, that of the beloved woman. Most people assume that, like some tribes, men were more important than women. And of course, Cherokees know better. You know, it's the women who run everything. And the beloved woman is many things. She can be a war woman. She can be a wise counselor, and she's one of that kind of woman. Was the reason that the British told the Cherokee that they had a petticoat government, because the women ran so many things. And Joseph created the character in the story of the young grandson, and it shows the kind of devotion that young Cherokee people learn, the kind of respect and honor that they are expected to show for their elders. So this is the story of the Milky Way. This is what the old people told me when I was a child. Long ago, when the world was new,
there were not many stars in the sky.
In those days, the people depended on corn for their food. They would grind it into cornmeal and store it in bins behind their house. Many times, bread made from that cornmeal would keep them from starving during the long winter months.
One morning, an old man and an old woman went to their bin for some cornmeal. What they found there upset them very much. The lid was off the bin. The level inside had dropped by a hand span. And there was cornmeal scattered all over the ground. Surely no one in the village would steal from the elders. Who could the thief be? Now that old couple, they had a young grandson who loved them very much. When he heard about that stolen cornmeal, he decided that he would be the one who would catch the one who was the thief, the one who had dared to steal from his grandparents. And that evening, when grandmother's son, for this is a Cherokee story, when grandmother's son had gone to her rest and elder brother Moon was not yet in the sky, that boy went to his grandparents' home. He hid near that bin of cornmeal and he waited. Late that night, the boy saw something. It was an eerie light coming across the fields. When it was closer, he saw it was in the shape of a great dog. That dog nosed the lid off the bin and began to eat. And when it had eaten its fill of the cornmeal, that dog turned and ran through the woods into the night. The boy lay for a time in his hiding place, not quite believing what he had seen. He waited until the sun rose the next day. And in that morning, when he looked on the ground in the cornmeal scattered around that bin, he saw the tracks of a giant dog. And when the boy told the people what he'd seen, no one knew what to do at first until they decided to go to the beloved woman, that leader among the people who was old and wise and understood so many things.
And when the beloved woman looked at the tracks of that dog, she said, "These are the tracks of no earthly creature. That is a spirit dog and may have great powers. We must be very careful. She told the people to gather their drums and their turtle shell rattles. We will hide near the cornmeal bin. And when the great dog comes to eat, we will make a great noise and frighten it so badly it never returns.
The people did as she said. They gathered their drums and rattles. They went and hid until they saw that creature appear and come close. And then all of them leapt out and began beating their drums and shaking their rattles.
Then all the people watched in wonder as the dog turned and ran across the field, leaping into the sky with a trail of white cornmeal streaming from his mouth, and every grain of cornmeal that fell turned into a star. And just as the beloved woman had said, the great dog never returned to bother the people, but that scatter of stars remained, what Cherokee people call Gitli Antlastana, where the dog ran. And that is the
how
story
Milky
the
Way.
Milky Way came to be.
Uh-huh.
That
Very
was fun.
yes.
That was fun.
Now, I think what they want us to do is to conclude at this point and make space at the end for live questions after this is streamed. Can you folks correct us if we're wrong in that assumption?